Imagine a world teetering between chaos and civilization. The ice had just begun to retreat, ancient glaciers groaned and melted into rivers that reshaped continents. Herds of mammoths were vanishing, the sky carried smoke from distant fires, and humans, no longer the desperate survivors of the Paleolithic, stood on the edge of something profound. They weren't quite farmers, not fully hunters anymore. This was the Mesolithic, the Middle Stone Age. A forgotten chapter, yet the single most important turning point in human history. We love to talk about the invention of farming, writing, or the wheel. But none of that could have happened without the strange, powerful, and dangerous choices made by our Mesolithic ancestors. This is the story of the people who invented civilization by accident. Imagine waking to a world in flux. The air is thick with fog, not from industry, but from the earth itself shifting after millennia under ice. Rivers are swollen with the melt of receding glaciers, and the great beasts, mammoths, aurochs, and giant elk, are disappearing one by one. You are not quite a hunter anymore, yet you are far from a farmer. You stand barefoot at the edge of a forest that wasn't there a generation ago, flint blade in hand, feeling the pull of a world that is no longer familiar. This is the Mesolithic, the Middle Stone Age, a time so often overlooked, yet without it, humanity's rise would never have happened. Somewhere between the harsh survival of the Paleolithic and the settled life of the Neolithic lies a turbulent age of invention, adaptation, and evolution. And yet, for all its brilliance, the Mesolithic is buried beneath layers of historical amnesia. Today, we peel those layers back. The Mesolithic began around 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age. It didn't come with a bang but with a thaw. As the world warmed, ancient hunting grounds vanished beneath forests. The tundra receded, replaced by woodlands teeming with new species, boar, deer, wild cattle. These animals were faster, warier than their ice age predecessors. Hunting them required agility, patience, and invention. Gone were the enormous spears meant to bring down mammoths. In their place came microliths, tiny, razor-sharp flint tools embedded into wooden shafts, creating lightweight, deadly weapons. It was the dawn of the composite tool, a technological revolution that allowed for new kinds of hunting, fishing, and food preparation. The Mesolithic toolkit was smaller but smarter. Fishing nets from twisted plant fibers, bone harpoons with backward-facing barbs, even fish traps built into rivers. The world had changed, and humans changed with it. But technology wasn't the only transformation. For the first time in history, humans began to build homes, not just camps or temporary shelters, but long-standing dwellings. In places like Star Carr in England and Lepenski Vir along the Danube, archaeologists have uncovered remnants of wooden huts, arranged in semi-permanent villages. These weren't towns yet, but they were the blueprints of civilization. Here, humans began to shape the landscape intentionally, clearing areas for better hunting visibility, burning forests to encourage plant growth, even rudimentary forms of agriculture, not farming as we know it, but cultivating wild grains and legumes, tending to them just enough to ensure they'd be there the next season. The line between forager and farmer blurred. Humans no longer simply took what nature offered, they negotiated with it. And in that negotiation came culture. With stability, however modest, came time. Time to think. To decorate tools with carvings. To bury the dead with care. To craft jewelry from animal teeth and shells. To create art that didn't just say, "I was here," but, "we remember." In Denmark, red ochre-stained bones tell us of burial rites. In Ukraine, burial mounds offer skeletons surrounded by hundreds of canine teeth, each one a symbol, a story. Dogs themselves, domesticated in earlier periods, became indispensable hunting partners in the Mesolithic, shaping both practical survival and emotional bonds. We weren't just changing the land. We were changing ourselves. One of the most remarkable Mesolithic sites is Lepenski Vir, nestled along the Danube River in present-day Serbia. Dating back over 8,000 years, this site shows sophisticated planning, homes built on trapezoidal platforms, facing the river, with stone floors, fire pits, and altars carved into human-fish hybrids. These weren't just shelters. They were homes infused with belief, tradition, and perhaps even fear. The Mesolithic mind had begun to wrestle with questions no tool could solve. Who are we? Where do we come from? What happens when we die? Meanwhile, in places like the Mount Sandel site in Northern Ireland and the Moglamosian culture in Scandinavia, we find more evidence of a people in flux. These were not idle folk. They tracked seasonal migrations, moved between summer and winter camps, stored surplus fish and meat in pits. They crafted dugout canoes to travel rivers, extending their reach and their trade. The Mesolithic saw the beginnings of social stratification, not full-blown kings and peasants, but evidence that some individuals held special status. Shamans, healers, elders, they began to occupy spaces beyond survival. These people passed on stories, knowledge, and perhaps the first real ideas of culture. Community was no longer just about blood, it was about identity. The environment was unforgiving. Sea levels rose rapidly, swallowing coastlines. The land bridge between Britain and continental Europe, Doggerland, was eventually drowned by the North Sea. Entire Mesolithic settlements vanished beneath the waves, preserved now as ghost cities for underwater archaeologists to rediscover. The Mesolithic people had to adapt constantly, moving inland, reshaping routes, reshaping diets. They began experimenting with nuts, roots, and even fermented foods. They used fire to crack open bone marrow, boiling stones to cook meals in hide-lined pits. Every discovery was a step toward modernity, though no one knew it yet. Spirituality evolved, too. Stone circles predate Stonehenge by millennia. Burial rituals became increasingly complex. Skulls were sometimes removed post-burial and displayed, possibly as ancestral totems or warnings. Human imagination was blooming. There's evidence of early musical instruments, flutes made from bird bones, suggesting not just survival, but celebration. Artifacts indicate trade over hundreds of kilometers, from the Baltic to the Mediterranean. Obsidian from volcanic regions, amber from the north, and shell jewelry from distant coasts, all passed hand to hand, a whisper of connectivity across the wild world. But the Mesolithic wasn't a utopia. Life was brutal, often short. Evidence of trauma in skeletons shows injuries from conflict, likely over resources or territory. Climate shifts meant food sources could vanish within a generation. And yet, these people endured. Their very adaptability laid the foundation for everything that followed. It was this age that gave birth to permanent settlements, organized religion, the earliest hints of government, and, most critically, the Neolithic Revolution. By around 8,000 years ago, the Mesolithic began fading, not in a cataclysm, but through slow transformation. Farming emerged in the Fertile Crescent and spread like wildfire. Wheat and barley displaced foraged foods. Domesticated animals replaced the chase of the hunt. Stone tools gave way to polished axes. But even as the Neolithic rose, it carried the Mesolithic's legacy, tools, ideas, architecture, and above all, the spirit of innovation born from necessity. Without the Mesolithic, there is no Neolithic. There is no civilization. Today, we walk on layers of Mesolithic ground, often unaware. We eat crops shaped by those first foragers. We live in houses that echo their early shelters. We form communities built on their model of collective resilience. The Mesolithic isn't just a chapter between two more famous ages. It is the prologue to everything. It is the memory etched into our bones, the moment humanity took a breath after the Ice Age and decided not just to survive, but to live. And now, as our own world faces rising seas, climate instability, and shifting ecosystems, perhaps we should look back, not to the gleaming monuments of ancient empires, but to the quiet genius of the Mesolithic. They had no kings, no cities, no writing, and yet they built the foundations of the world. Their gift wasn't just tools. It was adaptability, cooperation, and a deep, intuitive relationship with the land. They weren't primitives. They were pioneers. And their forgotten age may yet be our greatest teacher.